This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai iced coffee flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with MyLowe's Rewards. Earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
You know, some of them are full. Well, actually, I don't have any full siblings now. I'm an only child. I have step siblings and half siblings, but we all grew up together. And there were times when I knew I had put a lot of space between us. And we didn't always have the greatest of relationships. And I own 100% of that. That's me. That's on me. And then you come to somebody with news that, hey, Jack's not my father. And actually, we're not related at all. For a long portion of my life, I had actually said to myself quietly, I wish I wasn't related to these people. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but it's what I thought. And in an instant, that wish came true. And I regretted it 1,000 times over. There was nothing more than I wanted at that split second to remain related to my family.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. If there is one thing I hope we can all agree on, it's that families come in all shapes and sizes. Many people with DNA surprises end up with 2, 3, or more fathers, and just as many mothers, too. When Steve experienced his DNA surprise, he already had 2 men in his life that he called Dad. After he learned the truth about who his biological father is, he added a 3rd to the list. In this week's episode, Steve shares how he uncovered the truth. Trust me when I say it's an extremely unique story, and not much surprises me these days. Thank you for sharing your story, Steve.
My name is Steve. I am 60 years old, and I'm from Mason, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio. My DNA surprise story starts with eons ago when my mom had a story that she used to tell us. And that story was that all of us kids had a Native American background. We all had a Native American heritage. And as I've listened to some other stories, I've come to hear that maybe that's fairly common. You know, moms and dads of that generation love to tell their kids that they had some, Native American background.
Absolutely. Well, you hear that a lot.
Yes. And that story really traveled with me my entire life. Matter of fact, I worked for GE for a while, and they had heard that I had some Native American background. They actually wanted me to consider changing my EEO code, my Equal Opportunity Code. I said, well, I'm not really sure how much there is. But anyway, life progresses, and I happened to, marry a very wonderful woman, my wife, Becky. And Becky is a part-time forensic genealogist. She loves doing genealogical research and actually does it for a few attorneys. So one day she says, hey, let's build your family tree. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. That sounds like fun for you. And so off she goes building my tree. And after a while, she said, I found a lot of your ancestors, but I'm really having trouble locating any of the Native American background. I said, okay. She said, what you should do? You should take a DNA test because, and this was Ancestry.com, said, you'll get a breakdown of your genetic makeup. We can find out how much of you is actually Native American. Wonderful. So we took the test and sent it off, and I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, it comes back, and we're looking at my genetic makeup, and it says you are about 50% German, and you're 35% English, and you're, 10% Scottish, and you look down, it says Native American, 0.00. You are not Native American, which was a bit of a shock.
How did you feel when you saw that?
I felt, a little disappointed. And then there's also an element of the fact that you're like, the person that you trusted the most in your entire life has kind of been telling you a story. Maybe hadn't been honest with you. It was, I'll say, a little frustrating, but, knowing my mom, it wasn't incredibly surprising either. She was known to tell a tall tale or two every once in a while. So that was the end of the story. That's the end of my DNA story, or so I thought. A few weeks later, Ancestry emailed and said, hey, you've got a very close relation. Okay, let's look at that. They said, you have a first cousin, not like a cheap sixth cousin or, those generic fourth cousins, but you have a first cousin. So again, I'm thinking, well, I wonder which one of my cousins took the test because I know them all. We're all from the Cincinnati area, northern Kentucky. Matter of fact, most of my family's from northern Kentucky. The voice that you hear right now is actually learned behavior because most of my family actually talks like this. Good, God-loving, God-fearing northern Kentucky people. I go to look at my results, and I have a cousin in Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is an absolute shock to me because I know all my cousins. I know them all, and this has got to be some kind of mistake. Because, like I said, we're all from Kentucky. Most of us couldn't point Canada out on a map or spell it. If you spotted us the can and the duh, I think we'd still struggle. But anyway, we reached out to this young man. His name's John. It's like, John, do you have any idea how we could possibly be related? I mean, this is first cousins. That means one of your parents, one of my parents are siblings. That just doesn't make any sense. I know my mom, I know my dad, he knew his. We just couldn't figure it out. But we did realize that probably the easiest way to figure it out was to have my full sister, Laura, and then also to have my cousin, Sandy. Have those two young ladies take a DNA test, and however we all relate it to John, that would kind of triangulate the story, if you will. There could be only one answer at that point. We would know who did who at the zoo. As I'm fond of saying. So I called my sister. I said, sis, here, I'm going to send you a DNA test kit, and I want you to take it. She said, fine. So she did. She called me back 6, 8, 10 weeks later or whatever it was and said, Steve, I got my tests back. But I'm really having trouble with the results. I said, well, just read it to me. Just tell me what you see. Matter of fact, just go to your connections page and let's talk about who you see. And she said, I see all of these cousins on our mother's side, which was no surprise because those showed up on my test too. So, they're the same names. We both have the same names. She says, I don't see John at all. He's nowhere on my report. And she said, it also says I have a half-brother, and she gave my initials, a half-brother. Who's that? And I said, Laura, that's me. That's me. I'm your half-brother. She said, that can't be. Mom is our mom and dad is our dad. And I said, no, love, with everything that you just read to me, mom is our mom, dad is your dad. He's not mine. And it was probably one of the most horrible and excruciating moments I have had in my life for multiple reasons. One of which is I'm on an airplane at the moment. We're literally sitting at the terminal at the gate. The door is open. I am taking this phone call in one of the most public places you can possibly be, and you get some of the most private news that you will ever get in your life. And I think the other reason why it was just so crushing to me is even though my mom and dad had divorced when I was 5, and both of them had remarried, my father, my dad, Jack, was just an absolute pillar and foundation in my life. He was everything to me, and I just thought he was the greatest guy, and he was my biggest fan. He showed me what true and unconditional love is. I was so fortunate to have him in my life. He passed in 1999, and in some ways I'm glad that he's not here to experience this. But it was gut-wrenching. It really was. It was so painful.
What was going through your head at that point when you realized my dad's not my dad?
Honestly, when my dad passed in 99, I happened to be on a plane, and I had just landed in Boston. I was sitting on an airplane when I got the message that I lost him. And then, about 20 years later, once again, I'm sitting on the plane, and my dad is taken from me a second time. It is so difficult to comprehend that feeling. Unless you've been through it, there's just no way to understand it. There's not words that equate to that. I could give you other words, but they're not enough. Honestly, they're not enough. It knocks the wind out of you. Actually, at that moment, I actually panicked. And I got up to get off the plane. I literally said, I'm not staying on this plane because, an hour and a half long flight or whatever I was going to take. Just as I stood up, the flight attendant said, ladies and gentlemen, the front boarding door is closed. Everybody needs to sit down. That includes you, silly guy, right there. You sit down. So I had to process all of that just sitting right there on an airplane. It was,
wow.
It's horrible. Jack was wonderful. Jack was, he was just everything that, a son could want a dad. Over the next few days, as I continued to process that, I think the biggest thing was I felt like the story of me was a lie. Everything that I had, not everything, but a large portion of the foundation and the basis which I had built my person upon, being Jack's son, something I was so proud of, there were major cracks in that. I truly struggled with it. And for those of us who've experienced, I call it becoming a DNA orphan. If you've become a DNA orphan, you understand that cycle that you begin to go through. And I did. The next day I was sitting at home and I would say, I can't believe this. I've lost everything. This is crazy. This is just destroyed, who I am. And then your rational mind kicks in and says, but wait a minute, you are still who you are. You're still in a place wherever you are in your life, and that's where you are. Nothing's really changed. And, look back, at that point I was 58 years old. What in the last 58 years has changed with this new news? And the answer is truly nothing. So your brain begins to tell you you're totally okay. And then you fall apart again. And, that
right.
cycle, I timed it. It's about 7 minutes. And you just keep going over it time and time again.
Did you talk to your wife about this, like when you landed, or what did you do? What were your next steps like after you got off the plane?
She was sitting right next to me.
Oh, she was with you. Okay.
She was with me. Yeah, we were coming back from vacation. She was sitting right next to me. So she caught it real time. She was listening to the phone call. Even she admits she was, of course, very empathetic, very caring, and, felt very bad for me. But then on the other hand, she was like, oh my God, I got a new mystery to solve. There was a little bit of excitement for her.
Yeah. So were you instantly wanting to know who was your biological father?
Yes. So, that was Saturday. Sunday morning, we were having coffee, and I looked up at her and I said back, I'm 58 years old. I have no idea who my dad is. who my biological father is. I said, can you help me? She said, absolutely. So I went to work the next morning and she started the quest. And you know this. Sometimes those searches can take months, years, decades. Sometimes you never find the results at all. You just don't. I think she started, Monday at about 10 o'clock and Tuesday at 2 p.m, my cell phone pinged. It was her. She said, bingo, I got him.
What did you learn?
Oh, it was, again, this was so strange. Becky located Peter, my father, my biological father. He was a Canadian citizen. He had moved to the U.S. in the late 50s. I'm born in 1963. With John's help, my Canadian cousin, with John's help, she realized it had to be one of John's uncles. He had 5 or 6 of them, and she very quickly eliminated 4 of them just because of, they were dead or whatever they were. Then she looked for and located Peter, but he was in New York. So she actually found him on immigration forms going in and out of the U.S. So New York to London, London to New York, New York to Spain, Spain to New York to London, London to Cincinnati, Ohio in 1961. I was born in 1963. He had actually had a job working for the British Overseas Airways Corporation, BOAC. We know them as British Airways. And he moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, just shortly before I was conceived. And my mom was married for 4 years to Jack when I was conceived. And, I don't know what else you say about that.
Yeah, so clearly there was some sort of infidelity.
Yes.
And
there was.
And how did you feel when you realized that? Like, what's your relationship like with your mom?
Well, my mom and I had not had a great relationship for quite some time, primarily because of the way that she had treated my dad, Jack. We were not in regular contact at all. And in some ways, it was just another weight. It was just another thing that, quite frankly, made me very angry at her. Not because of maybe what happened. I try to look back at that and say, you don't know what was going on. You don't know what the situation was. My mom, I believe, had a very rough upbringing. In many ways, I believe she used men in her marriages as a way to progress up the social ladder. And I know that's a horrible thing to say, but the more I dug into the story, that's really the more that I found out. So I wasn't happy about it, but I did call her and say, look, I'd like to come over. I believe I have found something that belongs to you. So I drove over to her house. She lives in the area. And John had sent me a picture of my biological father and when he was in his late 20s. And when you look at that picture and any picture of me in that same age area, there's absolutely no DNA test required. We look so incredibly similar. So I took that picture and a picture of Peter at about the age when she would have known him. And I went over to the house. And I'm not incredibly proud of this. I mean, I went over, loaded for bear. I went over in an angry state. And I laid the picture down on the table and I slid it across to her. My first questions to her were, anything you got to tell me? She picked up the picture, looked at it, said, I don't know who this is. Who's this supposed to be? Your father? I said, well, that's a pretty bizarre question to ask. I mean, Jack is my father, is he not? I mean, Jack is my father. That man's not Jack. Why would you say that? She muttered something, and I said, well, yeah, whenever I'm trying to really make my mom angry, I call her by her first name, because that makes all moms incredibly angry is when you use their first name.
Yes.
So I said, no, Barb, that is. I think you already knew. Matter of fact, I think you've known for quite some time. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure you've known for decades. I'm not sure if she knew when I was born, but I have to tell you, by the time I was 5, I think she had to have a very strong inkling if she didn't already know. And by the time I was 20, there was no doubt. There could be no doubt in her mind.
Just because of how you looked, she should have known.
Well, not only because of how I looked, but also because of how I acted and who I was. I have 14 siblings, and I do not look or act like any of them. We are very, very different people. Even though we were raised in similar environments, I just have a different view of life. I have a different view of the way things should be. We all process things differently. We all hold just significantly different values, which is so bizarre because we grew up in the same house. But it had always been a problem for me my entire life. I knew I was different. You know, you hear the Sesame Street song, which one of these things is not like the others, right? Which one of these things doesn't fit? I knew it was me. I mean, we had a house full of shoes and I was a spoon. I mean, I was just that different than all my siblings. And at 11 years old, I'd asked my mom if I was adopted.
Okay, so you knew that you were different to the point that you thought you were from another family.
Yes.
What did she say at that time?
She says, no, you weren't adopted. I had you. I have pictures of you when you were a baby. No, you're not adopted, which, you know, that's one of those things that's 100% accurate and completely false at the same time, right? Yeah. It's 100% accurate. I am her child. She knew what the real question was. She didn't answer it. Mm-hmm. Right? And so my entire life, I knew I was different. And it caused problems because, and I want to be super clear about this, my siblings are all super people. They are wonderful people. They are loving people. They are caring people. But when you feel that different, being around your siblings, either consciously or unconsciously, you begin to put space between you and them. I did it. I know I did, because just below the surface of my conscious thought, I was always so ill at ease with being around my own siblings, not because they were alike, but because I could tell I'm an alien here. And when you're super young, you don't think much of it. But as time goes on, that feeling just grows and occasionally pops up into your conscious mind. I mean, I said to multiple people, I said, you know, I just don't understand where I came from. Of course, you say those things, you say those words, you never really think about the fact that, you know, that might actually be true.
Yes, I completely relate to that. Where it's like, why did I end up so different from my family? Why do I care about these things? But I never thought, I'm not of this family. That's why. So you're sitting across from your mom. You've confronted her. She's being kind of standoffish, it sounds like, about the whole thing. Doesn't want
evasive.
Evasive, yeah. Does she give you any more information?
Well, it's funny. So I slide the pictures. I ask her the questions. You know, she basically denies it. Her next response after that was, I'm not admitting to anything. I said, you don't have to admit to anything. I actually now at this point have 6 different DNA tests that confirms that man, Peter, is my biological father. I'm not asking you to admit to anything. I already know the truth. She said, well, what can you tell me about him? So what can I tell you about him? I can't tell you anything about him. You're the person that was with him, not me. The conversation went downhill from there, if you could imagine that. You know, at one point she says, we did things back in the 50s and the 60s that we never thought we'd have to justify today. I was like, oh, well, that makes it all okay. And then I think the coup de grace, the one that just all but ended the conversation for me, was when she looked at me and said, I don't know what you're so upset about. Look at your life. Everything turned out pretty well for you.
That's incredibly invalidating. Yeah.
It bordered on mean. Mm-hmm. And I know your listeners don't know me very well, but if you want to go to mean, I can go there really quickly. And I probably did. I left there without any information, and I realize that's probably my fault. My mother knows me well enough to know when I'm in full attack mode. And I'm sure she saw it when I came in the door. I'm sure I put her on the defensive instantly. That meeting went so poorly. And after it initially went that way, I laid all of that on her for being evasive and denying and everything. And as time has passed, I've looked back at it and I said, you know, dude, that's 100% on you. You can't expect her to answer questions when you're pointing a gun at her head. I mean, of course, I wasn't pointing a gun at her head, but, metaphorically. I said some horrible things. So,
well, and I would just say, give yourself some grace there, because this is a very shocking and traumatic thing. And I think sometimes our initial reactions are not what we would want them to be, but they are genuine and they are how we are feeling in the moment.
Well, I was definitely feeling it, and I wanted to make sure that she felt it too. Mm-hmm. The story, by the way, gets more bizarre. So I leave. And for anyone who's gone through this experience, they know that you'll be fine for days or weeks at a time. And then out of nowhere, these emotions will just roil up out of you, and sometimes uncontrollably so. So again, Becky and I are sitting at home at our house and having coffee, and I just lose it. I mean, nothing, no trigger, nothing. Then I start on a rant, and I said, I can't believe she lied to me. She has known for decades. I thought I was going to surprise her with those pictures. What I realized is she had been expecting this conversation anytime over the last 40 years. She knew it was coming at some point. Honestly just complaining of a storm to my wife. And I said, I just wish I knew what she was thinking back in the 60s, early 60s when I was conceived. My wife looks at me and says, have you read her book? I said, I'm sorry, her what? Have you read her book? She wrote a book. I said, Mom did not write a book. Becky turns to the computer, turns the screen around, right there on Amazon.com, a book of my mom's life, right there. And I said, I cannot believe that. She said, yeah, let me get a copy. I said, get a used copy. I don't want to get her any money. So we got a used copy. It comes in, and she says, would you like to read it? And I said, I'm not going to read it. You read it. And so we're sitting there at the kitchen table, and Becky's reading through it. And I mean, she is not but a few pages into it, and she reaches for a highlighter, a yellow highlighter. I'm thinking, what the hell could be written in a book that you want to highlight like that? She gets not 5 minutes into her reading. She folds the book closed and looks at me and says, sweetie, you need to read this, but I have to tell you up front, you're not going to be happy. So, okay. So I begin to read it, and she was right. Barb wrote the book very generically. So she doesn't use anyone's names. She doesn't use any dates, very few locations. She talks about her first marriage, and then she talks about her second marriage, which was to my dad, Jack, and then she talks about her third marriage to my stepdad, Jerry, great guy, and all of the activities that went on during that time period. And these are direct quotes from the book, which was after she had divorced her first husband. She said, I found myself alone in a world with 2 children. Those would be my older half-sisters, Kathy and Terry. I'm the next one in line to be born. So I found myself alone in a world, with 2 young children, 2 small children. My life was nothing about men, sex, and money. A couple sentences later, guys would say, hey, let's go to Miami this weekend. Let's swing. Everybody's doing it. Shortly thereafter, let's see, we've got some guys coming to the hotel, da-da-da-da-da. This is before she divorces my dad. The pace was such that I had to take black mollies, which are amphetamines, to keep up the pace. So while the book doesn't say it this way, and you kind of got to take the individual sentences and then kind of stitch them together, it's pretty clear that I was born at a out-of-state multi-hotel room amphetamine-fueled swingers club, which I'm not sure anybody's ever said that on your podcast before.
No, that is a first. That's a lot to take in. That's a lot to process. And I think depending on, your personal views about sex and drugs and all of those things, that's going to change how you feel about it. But how did you feel reading that and realizing that that is how you were conceived?
I read it and I thought, this can't be real. That's just so strange. So I start reading the whole book, and everything that I knew that she wrote in there that I had experienced, everything that I can confirm is true. So there's no reason why what she wrote before I was born is not true. I have to say, there's not much that's more disturbing than reading about your own or hearing about your own conception, unless it's reading about your own conception in a book your mom has on Amazon. It was a bit much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did Becky know about the book? I mean, obviously she's an expert researcher, but how did she know about it and you didn't?
She actually remembered Barb approaching my stepdad, Jerry, to sign a release for his name to be used in the book. And here's the horrible part. She did it at my older stepsister's funeral. So my stepdad, Jerry, who is also one of I was so lucky I got raised by two separate men, Jack and Jerry. They're wonderful guys. Jerry was a great dad too. Is a great dad. And he had lost one of his two daughters to cancer. And Barb brings a release form for the book. Stunning. But Becky remembered that.
Wow. Okay. So you read this. Understandable. I think that your first reaction is this even real? Is this fiction? But then everything else adds up. So then you realize, okay, this is real. Did you follow up with your mom, Barb, after you read the book?
So I did not immediately. And actually there was something in that passage that I read that there was something there eating at me. Everything is written so vaguely, but there was one word that was so specific. Miami. Didn't make any sense to me why she would write almost a vanilla story, but use a very specific city name. And this is back in 1963. And she was married to a city bus driver. Jack drove a bus for what we call Queen City Metro. It's the Cincinnati Bus Authority here. In 1963, jetting off to Miami for the weekend, that's not something that you did. I mean, that'd be like a $4,000 or $5,000 ticket today. Miami. I couldn't place it. And then I remembered a Beatles song back in the USSR. And it starts off, flew back from Miami Beach, BOAC, British Overseas Airways Corporation. Didn't get to bed last night. All the way the paper bag was on my knee. Man, I had a dreadful flight. I'm back in the USSR. I can't sing. I apologize to anybody who's listening to that. But then that completely made sense. My biological father worked for British Airways.
So he was able to get to Miami and then
probably
take her. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just, I'm so fortunate that I was of the age I was when I discovered all of this. At that point, I was actually slowing down our businesses. We were getting ready to retire. All that information wasn't really going to alter my life. But I have to tell you, if you're 25 or 30 years old, I think that would really, really rock you as an individual, or could.
As someone who found out at 35, yes, very much.
Yeah. But, I do have to tell you, as bumpy as this ride has been, it's been absolutely fantastic. As soon as I learned about Peter, my biological father, everything made perfect sense. I'm not like my siblings. Well, there's a reason for that. It actually gave me peace. It actually gave me closure to all these questions I'd had all my life. The other thing that it did, and this was, I would say, one of the greatest benefits that came out of it, at some point I had to share all this with my siblings. There's a time where you process it, and I think it's okay that you don't speak. But then at some point, I don't know when that is, you're now lying through omission. So I had to go talk to my different siblings and tell them what was up, all cards face up. And I am just sitting there desperately hoping that they don't take the exit ramp. I'm just afraid that it was going to ruin our relationship. And here's the message I have, which is if someone loved you before, truly loved you before your DNA results, they will love you after your DNA results. I remember taking my DNA results to my stepmom, so the wife of Jack's wife, Mary Ann, wonderful woman, and to some of my stepbrothers and sisters. So since Jack wasn't my father, they weren't my step-siblings, and I had my DNA test results with me. I shared the information. I said, she's my stepmom, but I call her Mom. Mom, I said, one of my brothers was there, and I just said, I got something to say, and I just don't know how else to say it other than to just say it. I have DNA test results, and Jack's not my dad. My stepmom looked up and said, "Is that what you came down to tell us?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." He goes, "Oh, hell, Steve, I thought you were going to tell us that you and Becky are getting divorced. No one's going to care about that piece of paper. Your dad loved you more than I could say. He wouldn't care if he was sitting right here." My stepbrother looked over and asked me if I was okay, which, by the way, is just a beautiful question to ask someone who's delivering this kind of news. Are you okay? I said, yeah, I am. And he took the DNA results and said, "This?" Held them up in his hands, just tossed them over towards the garbage can. He said, "You've been my brother as long as I can remember. There's no piece of paper that's going to tell me any different. I don't give a damn what that says."
That's amazing. I imagine that was a huge relief.
It was some of the most beautiful moments I've had in my life. I mean, it's true grace, right? It's true grace. I've given these people reasons to hit the exit ramp, but instead they just embraced me and dismissed anything, right? They dismissed anything that was a problem. And our relationships have actually all been closer since then.
What connection were you able to make, if any, with Peter's family? And had he passed when you found this out?
Peter had passed in 82. His wife had passed. Peter had no biological children. Peter actually had gotten remarried. His new wife had passed. We unfortunately haven't been able to speak with really anyone in any great detail about Peter. Here's what I do know about Peter. I know that DNA is incredibly strong. I know I look like him. I know my dad, Jack, was a bus driver for Queen City Metro. My stepdad, Jerry, was a truck driver for Holland Motor Express. Great, salt of the earth, hard-working guys. Great guys. I'm the first person in my family to get a college education. I'm an entrepreneur. My companies have actually all been in the sales and sales technology arena. I teach and train salespeople to be better salespeople. Peter, my biological father, and by the way, my company is called Top Gun Sales Performance. I picked an aviation motif out of the blue. Never met Peter. He worked for British Airways. His job was a regional sales executive. He taught and trained all of their sales agents. And he, too, was a public speaker. Matter of fact, wow. The day he died, he was giving a keynote speech at an industry forum. When he walked back to his table, sat down, had a heart attack, and died.
Oh, my gosh. I have goosebumps. That is wild.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. Was that validating for you? You know, you talk about how you felt so different from your family for so long, and then to hear that your biological father was so similar to you in so many ways.
Oh, so scary similar. Yeah, it was. So it was very validating. I finally felt, for the first time in my life, I felt complete. No offense whatsoever to my family, to the people who I love and they love me. None whatsoever. But what it did is it answered all of those questions. Why am I so different? Why do I have this really strange love for aviation that no one else in my family has? Why did I have this drive to go to college? Why did I become an entrepreneur? He was those same things. Peter was those same things. And I now realize that I am fortunate enough to have 3 dads. I had Jack, who was the man who was so central to my life. He divorced my mom. They got divorced. And she married another man, Jerry. Jerry was at a stepdad's. He's the best. He divorced my mom 25 years ago. And we spoke last week because we still talk all the time. And I still call him Dad. But when I look at Jack and Jerry and I compare them to myself, there's a set of characteristics that are missing from those 2 men. But they were all in Peter. What's left over, I guess, came from Peter. I kind of feel sad for people who only have 1 dad. I was blessed with 3 wonderful. Now, after a couple of years, I've also got to the point where I'm at peace with what happened everywhere. And I hate to... Some people won't believe in this, and I'm not sure how much of it I believe. I was having lunch with a friend of mine, Matt, and I was telling Matt all of this stuff that had happened. And he could hear the vitriol and the anger and the frustration coming out of my voice regarding Barb, my mom. And he said to me, "Ozzy, you can't be mad at her." And I said, "Matt, actually I can. I've actually gotten really good at it. I think I could teach a college course in it." And he said, "No, my friend. You see, before you guys came here to this plane of existence, Peter and Barb had decided they were going to have you. It was part of the plan. part of the life plan. And he said the reason that you can't be mad at them is because it was your plan too. You were in on it. So you need to let all that shit go. Everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. That was his belief. I think I might believe it too.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
Okay. So you've reached this place of peace, and talking to you before, I can tell you really are there. How did you get there? What did you do to process this?
I didn't get there by myself. Matter of fact, I wouldn't have gotten there by myself. There was no way. It's my family. My family brought me here. My wife, my 2 daughters, infinite support and love. My full sister, who's now my half-sister, Laura. She just wrapped her arms around me and just said, nothing changes between us, bro. Nothing changes. My oldest sister, Kathy, has just smothered me in love and care and just make sure that I felt great. My stepbrother, Jerry, I mean, I could just go through the names, but everyone worked so hard to make sure that I was okay. You know, time helps. Couple years for me, might take longer for others, may not take as long. Just the loving encouragement of my family. And I guess that's really what the crux of all of this is, right? It's about that word, family. It's the family you thought you had. Maybe it's the family you thought you lost. Maybe it's the family you thought you lost, but you didn't really lose. Because I guess the definition, as I have found it, you know, your birth certificate, that tells you who the government thinks your family is. And your DNA test is what science says your family is. I think both of those are wrong because I think your family is who your heart tells you your family is. I think your family are those people that hold you in their heart and they hold your heart in their hands. You know, if you think about it, when you are absolutely on your knees and the shit hits the fan, who's the person that's going to kick the door open and put themselves squarely between you and your problems? That right there, that's your family. That's your family. If you share DNA, that's wonderful. If you have the same mom and dad, that's great, but you don't have to. It's just the people that love you.
Well said. So well said. What is next for you in this DNA surprise journey? Have you put it behind you? Are you doing anything looking ahead?
The story is so bizarre. I have had so many people say, you've got to write this down. And so I've begun to do that. It might just end up being a therapy exercise. Or it might someday find itself on Amazon right next to my mom's book. That'd be great, wouldn't it? The thing about the story, my story, has been every time I think I got to the end of it, we find more stuff. And it gets more bizarre. I finally just told Becky to stop looking, please. I can't take much more of, here, if on my next birthday, a flying saucer would come down and an alien with a big head and the big, dark almond eyes got off and came and said, Steve, actually, I'm your father. I'd look at the trajectory of the story and say, yeah, that's about right. That wouldn't shock me. I'd like to do whatever I can to help others that find themselves, DNA orphans.
Yeah. What advice do you have for a parent who is keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
Look, you want to get in front of it. I know you think that you are protecting them. I know you think that you're trying to not hurt them. If you know, you need to have that conversation. Because it's a whole lot better having that conversation than having the other conversation. It's a whole lot better to have the, darling, I need to tell you something conversation than the mom, what the hell conversation. Here's the other thing. I went, and I realized this later, I went to see my mom, and when I did, I was only looking for 2 words, 3, depending on how you count the contraction, but it's, I'm sorry. That's all I wanted to hear. And that's all a DNA orphan will want to hear. You can start with anything. Look, I was in a bad place. Look, I made bad decisions. I had whatever. Or, hey, I was just having a hell of a lot of fun, and that was our life at the time, and whatever. But I'm sorry. I can tell I caused you pain, or I know that I hurt you. And I'm sorry. I never meant to do that. I'm delighted you're here in my life. I'm delighted that you're alive. I wouldn't give you up for anything. But I'm sorry that maybe those actions aren't what you want to hear, and I love you.
That's so well said in terms of, how to handle it after the fact. What advice do you have for someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise?
Hear my words. It's all going to be okay. I know right now you may be sitting on the floor somewhere and it's just disassembled you. The story of me is now a fable or a lie. It's okay. It's okay. I promise you it's going to be okay. The people who loved you before your test will be the same people who will love you after your test. It will be okay. I know it doesn't seem like it. Power through. Keep in your mind just love and forgiveness. Just keep those things in your mind. Love and forgiveness. They'll help you.
Steve, got me a little choked up there. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. It is certainly unique, but so many of the threads that you talk about, the feelings that people go through, are so relatable. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And I just wish you continued peace as you continue to navigate it.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute delight. And I so appreciate what you're doing for the community. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again to Steve for sharing his story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at DNAsurprisespodcast.com. Until next time, this episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.